Thank you, panelists. The second panel on what does strategic autonomy mean in the cyberspace will be moderated by Dr. Shashi Jayakumar, Senior Fellow, Head of the Center of Excellence for National Security, and Executive Coordinator of Future Issues and Technology at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Over to you, Dr. Jaya.
Thank you very much, Amalina. The second panel is what does strategic autonomy mean in cyberspace? It's topical and sensitive. And before I go into that, I want to say how much I learned from the previous panel, the two speakers and discussant. It struck me that so much of what we heard just now, gray zone operations, attribution, these sorts of words are integral parts of the vocabulary, which itself has a firm place in the cyber domain. In Cold Wars, of course, ships may collide. But well, in the cyber domain, when cyber forces collide, the potential for escalation is rapid. And in my view, perhaps in the view of the speakers and discussant, there's even more potential in the cyber domain for miscalculation and conflict compared to, say, over strategic issues discussed earlier. Some might even argue that conflict in this particular set of issues, cyber, has already begun. With those thoughts, I would like to very briefly introduce the two speakers and discussant. Benjamin Ang is a senior fellow and deputy head at SENS in RSIS. Dr. Alex Deforgue is a postdoctoral fellow and specialist in French cyber defense geopolitics of the data sphere, that's GOEDE, which is a research and training center in humanities and social sciences at University of Paris 8. Our discussant is Situraj Ponraj, who's a visiting senior fellow at SENS and RSIS. With this, you have a rare and, in my view, correct blend of policy, practical, and now academic experience, the right blend to take us through these issues, which, as we've agreed, are sensitive, but I think all the more need to be discussed. Without further ado, Benjamin, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Shashi. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak on this topic, and I'd like to address ASEAN and strategic autonomy in cyberspace in the next 10 minutes. And just to remind everybody who the ASEAN member states are and who we have to our north, the large grey country to the top, otherwise known as China. And to understand what strategic autonomy is in cyberspace is to also understand what ASEAN's digital master plan is. And if you look at the priorities that have been developed in this master plan 2025, which was launched this year, really the emphasis is on recovery, on economy, on trade, on infrastructure, digital services and markets, e-government and business, and basically all these things to help ASEAN to develop and to grow so that the ASEAN member states can all achieve prosperity. So what does the ASEAN member states have agreed to in the area of cyber issues? We can look to the ASEAN Ministers Cybersecurity Conference or AMCC meetings which have been held since 2016 under the Singapore International Cyber Week. And we can see that the ASEAN ministers who are in charge of cybersecurity in the various ASEAN states have agreed on the importance of practical cybersecurity norms, developing these norms, and appointing Singapore to propose the mechanism to enhance cooperation. Cooperation including capacity building, confidence building measures, which is very close to what Shashi was saying about the collisions that happen in cyberspace, and then having a formal cybersecurity coordination mechanism, which is why Singapore and the United Nations have been tasked to draw up a checklist of steps to implement these cyber norms and the legal frameworks and sharing networks to build up a rules-based order in cyberspace in this region at least, based on the 11 norms that were agreed in the UN Group of Governmental Experts meeting in 2015. And in a practical way of implementing this, the RAP matrix was presented during the ASEAN Cybersecurity Coordinating Meeting in 2020 to assist the member states. And this matrix allows each member state to identify some low-hanging fruit to operationalize the 11 norms. This is a project led by Singapore and Malaysia. And we are very glad to have been part and center of the capacity building efforts in moving this forward. So just a reminder of what the 11 cyber norms are, and I won't go through them in detail, but you can see there are things like not attacking one another and to assist and cooperate with one another in prosecuting terrorists and criminals, and also to not attack each other's computer emergency response teams. That's what it stands for. And to not allow one's territory to be used for attack. So these are good norms to have, and if they can be put into practice in ASEAN, they can really lead to a very stable cyberspace. Now let's zoom out to look at ASEAN's prevailing geopolitical orientation. And it's obvious to everybody that ASEAN is different from other regional groupings like the EU. If we look at three aspects of it, internationalization with multiple external players is important. Multipolarity bolsters strategic autonomy, and to avoid great power competition. ASEAN member states do not want to be put in a position to have to choose between the great powers. And if we look at the ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, we can see that this is baked into ASEAN's whole ethos of independence, sovereignty, and being free from external interference and non-interference with one another. The roots of this ASEAN member states having come from colonial backgrounds, where they have been independent for not that many years. And to the credit of ASEAN, the member states have been able to preserve their independence for these decades. And that's really key, because the ability of the states to be able to be not interfere with one another is important. So therefore, when the different member states have different strategic views of cyberspace, this is not, in a sense, technology words, it's not a bug, it's a feature, because they have the independence to think of how they want to view cyberspace. So in some states, the focus is on the technology, the hacking. In some states, it's on the control of information. There are different perceptions and valuation. For example, there are different levels of how freedom of speech is valued in different member states. There are also different threat perceptions on who is the threat, whether the threat comes from up north, or whether the threat comes from Western states, or whether from North Korea. And are these threats even important? Because if it's not disruption and it's just espionage, then some states don't see that as a big problem, because they are used to being spied on all the time. And of course, there are cyber maturity differences, because in many cases, the priorities are cybercrime, fake news, child porn, ransomware, hate speech, rather than what we might be thinking of, which is protecting critical infrastructure. So there are 10 states and 10 different types of government, ranging from democracies to military governments to communist states. So what is strategic autonomy in cyberspace? Well, if we look at it, there's actually a spectrum. I would suggest that in this spectrum, no autonomy is not desirable. To be totally dependent on US or China is not something that ASEAN member states want. It is too risky, especially with the amount of conflict that's going on and the threat of technology bifurcation in the world. And pure autonomy of total self-sufficiency in technology is not going to be feasible for ASEAN, because ASEAN member states do not produce their own technology. So the only practical and feasible middle ground seems to be mixed autonomy, a diversified tech supply chain which is not dependent solely on either the US or China, a digital resilience to be able to cope if there were indeed this dreaded tech bifurcation in the world. So the challenges are because the cyber supply chains are interconnected along many nations. Technology is no longer just in one place. Even your data is actually stored in many different countries. So the ASEAN Smart City Network is really an example of how we are all interlinked, and we can't be completely an island separate from the rest. Few states can control the development of the key technologies like US and China. And these are some of the key technologies we're talking about. Data security all the way to digital communication security. None of the ASEAN member states could completely control some of this. So the importance then is to reduce the strategic dependencies in key technology areas, reduce the dependency solely on US or on China in all of these areas, and to be able to source the products and services autonomously without being forced to choose, without being forced to say you can only buy from us and our allies and not from our competitors or adversaries. This is very important for ASEAN. we also have to remember that there's not just autonomy from states, there's autonomy from the big tech, because the big companies also hold a big monopoly on who is providing services. Mass communication platforms are held in a stranglehold by these big tech companies, so are cloud services, operating systems, and any over-reliance on any one of these alone is a risk to autonomy. So what is needed? More regulation? Maybe. More innovation? Maybe both. Protectionism is something that we really are concerned about as well, because that really hurts the trade. And as you see back to the digital master plan, trade and economy is such an important priority. And so we know that the largest trading partner of ASEAN has a lot of influence. Right? China is pushing for ASEAN-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. And regional trust in China varies from state to state. And yet, it's not the trust that matters, it's the trade. Because you don't have to trust a nation in order to trade with them. This is actually the key thing. ASEAN is China's top trading partner, China is ASEAN's top trading partner. And there is a real need for ASEAN to be able to figure out how to balance this. Because if the strategic partnership leads ASEAN to have to take sides in the major power rivalry, that will not be something we want. So the question is, can the EU and ASEAN cooperate in cyber to help each other's strategic autonomy? There are benefits to the EU, and you could build strategic stability through diversifying the EU's economic dependencies. Benefits to ASEAN are opening up of EU markets and supply chains. We could reduce dependency on US or China alone. Of course, to caveat that ASEAN may not accept EU values, and ASEAN wants trade, not to take sides. But if there can be cooperation, it could be beneficial for both sides' strategic autonomy. Thank you.
Very good, Ben. Enjoyed hearing that. Now over to you, Dr. Alex.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the organizers for inviting me to this workshop. So I'm very pleased to be here with you, at least online. So for my presentation, I will come back on the narratives in France and in Europe about strategic autonomy regarding digital issues. So those narratives are closely linked to the concept of what we call digital sovereignty, or maybe sometimes called also technological sovereignty. But in fact, if digital sovereignty is the goal, and autonomy, strategic autonomy is the means to achieve it. So in this short presentation, I want first to review the discourses about digital sovereignty in France and Europe, and I will then explore what do those discourses tell about the implementation of a strategic autonomy regarding digital issues. So in France, digital sovereignty has been discussed since more than 10 years. It has been employed to cover many different meanings, depending on the type of actor who uses it, thus raising a lot of debates on the meaning of the concept, on its controls and its implementations, of course. So digital sovereignty or technological sovereignty has been used to talk about the internet governance debate, for example, tax issues, funding of the press, propagation of jihadist propaganda, hate speech or disinformation, and also about extraterritoriality of US laws. But the common feature of all these narratives is the denunciation of the domination of the US over Europe and France. And it could be by the state, for example, for the case of the internet governance debate, or by American digital companies. But more recently, the notion has also been used to react against the growing presence of Chinese companies in the European market. So in fact, the problem is not that this is the US or China. The problem is the European dependency. So why such a criticism? Of course, at first, those narratives about digital sovereignty were based on the idea to gain market and economic advantage. But the past 10 years has changed that view. And in fact, now the European dependency is perceived as a real geopolitical risk for the EU and its member states. The risks are political destabilization, strategic and economic espionage, for instance, and they were illustrated with well-known affairs such as the Snowden revelations or Cambridge Analytica affairs. And it has been accompanied by the growing defense toward the American ally and its companies. So these potential threats for the political, economic, and democratic future of the European Union led member states to take measures to protect themselves from those risks that are being identified in a very tense geopolitical context with the election of Donald Trump in the US, Brexit, Russian destabilization on the eastern borders of Europe. So therefore, digital sovereignty is mobilized to evoke a French and European desire for emancipation and of digital companies. So overall, the notion has become an argument to justify technological and industrial development led by French and European companies. But if the concept of digital sovereignty is mainly used in the media, strategic documents regarding digital policies refer to the notion of strategic autonomy. This concept is understood in France as the way to exercise the state sovereignty. It implies France's autonomous ability to assess, decide, and act. So strategic autonomy is not a new concept in France. In fact, it's a founding principle of the French defense politics since World War II. And it's used in particular to refer to the development of military capabilities, allowing it to meet its military commitments, French military commitments. So political discourses on strategic autonomy were mainly constructed under General de Gaulle and have been adopted by all his successors, aligning an emancipation from the American military tutelage and the development of a defense industrial base in France. So this concept of strategic autonomy is based on what Lucien Poirier called decision-making autonomy. General Lucien Poirier was the theorist of the French nuclear deterrence strategy. And he defines the decision-making autonomy as the faculty for people to choose freely, free from foreign pressure, the political project it deems to be in conformity with its interests and its resources. So what is interesting, I think, about the concept of strategy autonomy that versus sovereignty is that strategic autonomy does not exclude alliance. In fact, the alliances are promoted as long as they are explicitly desired and more importantly, informed. So thus, it resides in the choice of the modalities of interdependence. And I think that is what is the most interesting about the strategic autonomy regarding digital issues. And as Benjamin underlines, within the context of globalization and in this interconnected world, it's purely an illusion to think that a state could be entirely sovereign in cyberspace, maybe with the exception of the US, but I'm not sure either in that case. But all the other states cannot just think about the entire sovereign in cyberspace. So in Europe, the concept of strategic autonomy regarding digital issues has gained in popularity since 2016. And we can find it in the documents of strategical retention of the EU in matters of security and foreign affairs. But the proliferation of publications on the topic shows that it hasn't been unanimously accepted by all member states, and in depth and implications. So notably, the postures regarding the US crystallized as a tension between the EU member states. So at the European level, the European Commission in its new digital policy agenda states that European technological sovereignty starts from ensuring the integrity and resilience of European data infrastructure, networks, and communications. And so that as France, European technological sovereignty is not defined against anyone else, but by focusing on the needs of the Europeans and of the European social model. So unlike France, at the EU level, strategic autonomy also includes the question of the defense and democracy, and of course, the protection of the defense of the European social model. So what is now strategic autonomy in practice? To address the geopolitical risk of foreign companies' domination, France and the EU adopted mainly two kinds of policies. First, the support the development of European and French-based industry. So, for example, in France, it started in 2011 with a project called Sovereign Cloud. And we can mention another example at the European level, which is Gaia X, which is a European industrial initiative, but with the support of the European institutions. And it started in 2019. So the second kind of policies is the adoption of regulations, such as GDPR, NIS directives, Digital Services Act, Digital Market Act, and so on. Cybersecurity Act also, in order to structure the market and promote an European model. So for example, and I will finish on that, France voted regulations to put in place certification of products and services by the French Cybersecurity Agency. And the goal of such regulations is not to ban every foreign company of the French market, but it's another way to encourage the development of the national industry. And with the Cybersecurity Act adopted by the European Parliament in 2019, this kind of strategy is now implemented at the European level. That would be all on me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alex. That was fascinating. And now, Situ, as the discussant, you have the enviable or unenviable task, I'm not sure, of drawing these very, very interesting strands together over the next few minutes. Situ, over to you, please.
Thank you, Sashi. Indeed, I think I've been really listening with great interest, and it was a thought-provoking set of presentations. I think we do understand that the concepts of strategic autonomy and resilience in cyberspace is not an entirely easy concept, are not easy concepts to wrap our heads around, and they are understood differently in the EU and ASEAN, and even within the EU and ASEAN. I suppose that listening to the listening to the presenters, excuse me, speak, we could see that the concepts perhaps converge on the point that a country or region should have a capability to decide and implement plans so as to successfully navigate challenges to its security, economic viability, and social stability in an interdependent world, while at the same time pursuing desirable political goals, opportunities, and preserving its relevance in the world. And this is especially so because a secure, trusted, and stable cyberspace, as the panelists shared with us, is increasingly an area of concern in an increasingly digitized world. Many developing countries in this region and beyond look upon digitalization as a means of leapfrogging economic progress and improving the lives of their people. And cyberspace, both the technologies and associated with it, as well as the information generated in it, is a key enabler of much of this digital activity. And therefore, the ability to decide and act freely, I think, as we heard from the panelists, is now increasingly dependent also on the ability to master the cyber and digital domain. And perhaps listening to the presentations, you could take out three factors that make cyberspace have a unique, three factors that have a unique bearing on exercising strategic autonomy and achieving resilience in cyberspace. First, it is transboundary, both in terms of opportunities and threats. They arise from everywhere around the world. And there are two possible implications of this. First, because opportunities arise from everywhere in the world, and as Ben and others pointed out, we are so interconnected that you can't afford to be closed. The second is, of course, that because you can't afford to be closed, attribution from, as you pointed out, is difficult. The second is that governments do not possess all the resources, capabilities, or levers to managing cyberspace, the digital domain. Tech companies and industry play a key role together with other private actors in managing this space. And fourthly, I think what's important from hearing from the panelists is that the cross-cutting nature of cyberspace and its impact not just on the security, its impact on the economic, its impact on the social values, social resilience spheres, which makes it somewhat of a difficult problem. Cyberspace defies neat solutions, and any country or region wanting to master this space will have to balance the security, economic, and social imperatives on achieving these goals. I just want to bring out three reflections that arose as I was listening to the panelists. And the first is that regions and countries, therefore, may need to build the components of autonomy and resilience at their own pace, given regional and national priorities and needs. When we look at strategic autonomy or even resilience, interestingly, they share the same factors, the five components. Perhaps you have to have decision making or policy coordination, ability, autonomy, freedom to act, or operational cooperation. Thirdly, information autonomy, where you will be sharing, collecting, and being able to manage information. Fourthly, securing technology. Alice spoke about technology sovereignty and supply chains through technical standards and diversification, and ecosystem development, fifthly, which also builds economic strength of the region. Now, if all these components are components which make up strategic autonomy, then different countries, different regions are going to be taking different priorities as important. I think Ben mentioned that. And the key thing is how to balance this. And this is a geopolitical consideration because different priorities, security, a particular country may be aligned to a particular group of countries, and for trade, it may be aligned to a different set of countries. So I think this is where there needs to be a little bit more discussion and thought. The second is that the building of strategic autonomy and resilience in cyberspace should be an opportunity to strengthen international cooperation and multilateral mechanisms rather than a drawing inward. I think many speakers before this have talked about the importance of multilateral importance of mechanisms such as the UN. The key thing here is that cyberspace, because by its very nature, its transboundary nature, you have to make those connections with different countries. And I think these are areas where EU and ASEAN can specifically work together. Hearing our panelists, firstly on diplomatic efforts to build a multilateral, rules-based multilateral order in cyberspace, specifically in terms of norms. Secondly, in terms of objective technical standards. And finally, I think the key thing that I drew from the panelists is the fact that cooperation and capacity building is key if we want to build resilience or strategic autonomy in cyberspace. This is something that the EU and Singapore have recognized, in fact, and have been working very closely on. So very rich set of presentations. Thank you very much. And these are my reflections.
Thank you very much, Situ. Would either of our speakers like to come back and to respond to some of the points that Situ has raised? Anyone? Very well. I think we should lead into the general floor for the Q&A, but if I may please, if you do not mind, exercise something of a prerogative of the moderator. There is something which Situ has touched on, which I thought was quite interesting, and that's the issue of resilience. So Alex, if I could pose a question to you, it's a bit of a long-winded one, but bear with me. some of the deeper thinkers when it comes to digital and cyber issues that we have engaged with in RSIS are actually our friends from France. And I'm not just saying this because you and our colleagues are here, but when we engage, for example, thinkers from CAPS and other institutions, the sense of resilience and resistance, successful resistance to, let's say, disinformational attacks, which is partly linked to cyber, of course, is quite interesting. And there have been a whole series of papers and a major report concerning, of course, the Macron leaks. So that's one example. But one of the things we consistently heard from our French friends, I'm not saying this is a unitary French view, but we did hear it, is that at the people level, at the level of ordinary society, the people in France were not so easily convinced by this campaign of disinformation, which took place around the time of the French presidential elections, which was partly made up of lies and outright fabrications and slander. Because we heard, correct me if I'm wrong, the French have this basic reasoning and critical thinking ability. This is something which I can say Singapore agencies are looking at in a very deep and concerted manner, because we need this, and I presume we need this started from a young age. I wonder, Alex, if I realize this may not be quite your subspecialty, but whether you could shed light whether my characterization of the French position and approach to these issues is in fact correct.
Okay, I try. I think the situation now in France is very different of the situation you described at the time of the previous presidential election. And we can see now, if at that time disinformation campaign that did not, at least we cannot really find some consequences of those disinformation campaign on the election. Maybe now it will be different. Maybe for the next election it would be different, because disinformation campaigns became more complex, more and we had also all these social movements in France, Yellow Jackets, and now all these of course pandemic disinformation we know about all over the world. And in fact, I think, but we will see for the next election will take place next year. I think it will be not, maybe consequences will be more important, I fear, at least. But also it was different because the Macron leaks you quoted happens in very late in the campaign. It in fact happened just few days before the election. And we have this, in France, we have this regulation, this law saying that 2 days before the election, no media are allowed to talk about the political campaign. So it's the consequences about this those leaks were very minimal, because of that also. So this was a specific context, but I fear that from the next election it will not be the same.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. It's a bit of a stark warning for not just France, but I think democracies worldwide. So thank you for that. We do have questions coming. The first question, Benjamin, you may have seen it on the chat, but allow me to read it out. How can ASEAN invite internationalization, quote unquote, of multiple external players while preventing negative foreign interference in ASEAN's domestic/internal affairs as well, especially when ASEAN in the Indo-Pacific region is, of how I see it, in terms of the middle of 4 centers of gravity: US, China, UK, post-Brexit, and the EU. Would you like to have a stab? I think we should be fair and try to throw this open to either speakers or discussant. But Ben, would you like to have a stab at this first?
Absolutely, Shashi. I'll try and see what I can do before we hand over to Situ. Then, this is a very broad question, And perhaps if I knew the answer to this, we would really have solved a lot of problems of the whole of ASEAN. But if I just focus on the cyber side, which I feel a bit more comfortable in talking about, in a way, in the cyber world, ASEAN has no choice. And ASEAN has to be international and engage with multiple external partners because of the fact that our supply chains are not in ASEAN. All our technology is spread throughout, and we are dependent on so many different countries for all of the different technology, the software, the hardware, the network systems, even 5G. So there are really, it's really not a question of whether we should or not. It's something we have to do. But putting my lawyer hat on, then I'd say, how do we define what is a negative foreign interference? That will really come down to where each ASEAN member state is going to say, we accept that there's engagement, but there is a limit. For example, in tech, we would say capacity building. Happy to have capacity building, but not accepting people who dictate what the core values should be if they are if they are contrary to the ASEAN states' values. Or, for example, happy to take infrastructure, help in building infrastructure, but not accepting that if that infrastructure is used to spy on the ASEAN member state. And so really it comes down to the independence. The independence is very important for the ASEAN member states to really say yes. And so therefore, if I'll round up with saying that ASEAN member states would probably be more accepting of international technology standards that are accepted by all, rather than a particular block of country trying to impose technology standards and approving certain clean lists of technology, but rather to work on what is scientifically and for the engineering side as acceptable. But I know that my colleagues like Situ have a quite wide experience in ASEAN matters as well.
Thanks very much, Ben. We do have a comment. It's an invitation to respond from Here Gorvan from CAPS. I apologize if I'm pronouncing the name wrongly. I hope you can hear me, Mr. Gorvan. Would you like to come in? I think you're rounding back to a point which has been discussed earlier, which you would like to illuminate. If so, please do so.
Thank you, Shashi. I hope you're hearing me fine. Okay, perfect. Very happy to be here with you today and very thankful for a very insightful discussion up to now. I simply was, well, I didn't intend to jump in the discussion, but since you mentioned maybe the situation of France and the run-up to the next elections, where, of course, as you might remember, President Macron already said that in his opinion, there was a real threat of interference from foreign powers into the process. I simply wanted to concur with Alex, with whom I completely agree on the analysis, and maybe to shed light on two things very quickly. First, the notion that if you want to be, since we wanted to be better prepared for, I mean, interference that were meaning to clearly destabilize our democracies, and because that was our diagnosis, and that was clearly framed in a report that we made, both CAPS and IRSEM, in 2018 on the manipulation of information. Then we have been active in those years in order to be better prepared for the next election. This includes two things. This includes building capacity and preserving what has been very accurately defined by the speakers, whom I thank, by the ability to assess, the ability to make attribution, and so on. So abilities are very important, but there is also one other aspect, which is defining clear and predictable rules to help you distinguish from what is part of the normal political debate, because in a democratic debate, you have to accept the notion that people would sometimes flirt with the limit of what is the current and organized political debate, and sometimes political activism can go a bit further. But it doesn't mean that the political authorities have the right to infringe on that practices, because then they would be taking part in the debate. So that's a problem. But are setting predictable rules to prevent this part of blurred line in terms of how you conduct a political debate to be used by foreign powers or by malevolent actors to actually destabilize the debate. So that's one aspect that I just wanted to share with you as a French perspective. And the second is that one of the important things that the EU has been doing is been to promote regulations on big platforms, DMA and DSA, two important texts that are to be adopted probably during our presidency of the EU, but that was a much more longer process, and that should be helping us in defining these rules and making them apply in the appropriate timing and with the appropriate actors, which are the platform themselves. So I'll stop there and thank you again for this exchange.
Thank you very much. That's fascinating, and I think sure to be of profit to both sides, France and Singapore, if we can continue the contact and discussion, and maybe even contrast at the track 1.5 level. I'm sure it happens at the government level anyway, but we've always found our hearing the views of our French friends very, very interesting and important in this particular space. So thank you for that. We have a raised hand from Professor Alan Chong, RSIS. You have not, Alan, I think, entered in your question in the chat, or this could be just my failure to understand the technology, which means I should not be really moderating this panel at all, I guess. But in any case, if I could invite you to speak and ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Shashi. Thank you so much. I was actually trying to type as fast as I can. Okay, I'm glad that I can ask it straight. This is for Dr. Alit Deforge. What is the balance in France between policing the internet, i.e. against hate speech, advocacy of vaccine skepticism, for instance, and allowing the right to free expression to be exercised on the web? And I think this is also a concern here in Singapore, although so far, I think when correction notices are given under the current POFMA regulations, the government has, I think, flagged out very extreme cases where, facts are clearly on the wrong side of it. So I'm glad to hear your views. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this question. Well, it's not my area of expertise, of course, but I try to respond. I try to answer your question. Well, of course, balances is very difficult, but I think France as a state is not interested in to ban any speech, but in the French law, it's very clear what is upon hate speech or I don't know, jihadist propaganda and so on. But of course, practices and the way online practices are more and more difficult to implement those laws. But I think, well, from the French perspective, it's not the idea to try to do some content moderation over that is actually unlawful from in France. So if hate speech is unlawful in the street or whatever, it should be unlawful also in cyberspace, and that's all. But again, it's not my area of expertise, so I'm afraid I will not be able to make a more precise answer to your question.
Thank you very much, Alex. Would anyone else like to comment at this stage? Are there any further questions? In which case, if I think there will be no objections if I draw to a slightly early close what has been really a fascinating panel. I think I speak for everyone here to say we've really enjoyed hearing joint French and Singaporean perspectives, and it's given us quite a lot to think about. And I think this will take us into profitable contacts and collaborations, hopefully down the line. So back over to you, Amelina, please.